Hi, my name's Starsky and welcome to From the Studio on Clubbing TV. In this episode, I'm going to be taking a look at another of Behringer's monosynth clones. It's the very black and orange Behringer WASP Deluxe. Well, as with all the other Behringer clones, this one again is based on a difficult to get hold of and expensive vintage synth. The originals were really cheap at the time, around £199, which is a fraction of the cost of something like the Mini Moog, which was 5 or 6 times that. They've got digital oscillators with analog envelopes and an analog filter. So the original was probably the first digital analog hybrid synth. So it was quite advanced technically in its day. It had a weird keyboard as well. The keys didn't move and were basically electronic circuits that worked on electrostatic touch, something like the Arturia Micro Freak, if you've seen one of them. And they could work on batteries as well and were pretty flimsy by all accounts. So they were cheap, they broke, and no one really cared for old analog synths at the end of the 80s, which meant not a lot of them survived, making them rare, making them expensive, because they do sound really good. So let's take a look and a listen, and we'll start off by looking at the oscillators as normal. As I said, it's got 2 digital oscillators, but you'd never really know it because they sound really good. And to be honest, everything I've read about them and the history of them has different descriptions of the oscillators. Some say they're digitally controlled VCOs, whether they mean digital controlled oscillators, I don't know. Some say they're digital, so I'm not exactly sure how they built, what they are, but it doesn't really matter unless you're in the pure analog voltage police, because they, as I say, they sound really nice. So let's take a look at them. We've got the oscillators on the left, then we've got the control oscillator, it calls it here, but that's the LFO, then the filter, and then the 2 envelope generators on the right. You've got one for the VCA and you've got one for the filter. The 2 oscillators are really similar except for these 2 knobs in the center. On oscillator 1, it's the width of the pulse, and on oscillator 2, it adjusts the pitch. We can turn them on and off with this switch on the right. So we've got sawtooth, a square, and we have this thing called enhanced mode. And that's pulse width modulation. So it's got an internal LFO. You can't change the speed of that. But what it means is that you don't have to take up your LFO to do PWM sounds. And as both of them have got it, you can get really nice fat tones. So instantly, you know you're playing with a good synth because it just sounds great, just sticking the 2 oscillators on. But let's take a closer look. Oscillator 1 sawtooth. And that sounds really nice to me. We can change the octave with this switch on the left. And that's the same with oscillator 2. The second oscillator has this pitch. Let's turn that. Which obviously means that we can have sort of detuned patches. Which gives you really nice, rich tones. We've also got an external in on this sort of little mixer section, so you can bring something in through this little patch point on the top, and you can also send out the oscillators through these 2 outs at the top. And although, like with all the Behringer clones, you can put this in Eurorack if you like, there's not a lot of point with this one. You've only got these 3 little connectors here, so you can do, but it's not really a Eurorack synth. It's definitely, either said, a standalone. And you'll notice maybe when I'm playing this and I play low on this little keyboard, I don't get anything. And that's because the Wasp only had a 3-octave keyboard. I think, well, the Wasp Deluxe had a 3-octave keyboard. The original Wasp had an even smaller one. So these are set up. It's the same with all the Behringer things, the Pro 1, the Cat and the Wasp, that they'll play the 37 keys, but they won't play outside that range because the clones of these instruments that only had 37 keys, they'll only play on those 37 keys. So if I go outside that range, it doesn't play anything. And that doesn't mean it's broken, it's just the way it works. I've done a detailed review and demo of this on my YouTube channel, and lots of comments have said, hold on a minute, mine's broken, it doesn't play all the notes. None of them do. The originals didn't, so these don't. So if we go really high up on the keyboard, it doesn't play. But there it does, and that's up here somewhere. So moving over to the LFO. As with everything on this, the LFO seems quite simple because, you know, there's not a lot going on here. But we think we've got one LFO on this, but actually with the envelope generators, we've got two. Let's just look at the first one, the control oscillator. We've got 6 wave shapes on the control oscillator. We've got a sine, a saw, a ramp, which is like an inverse saw. We've got a square, we've got noise, and we've got random, which is like sample and hold. So we can modulate the pitch. But it's not modulating much, is it? And it's not actually going very quick. So it's a really gentle LFO. You're not getting really mental modular style modulation on this. But it's not the only LFO. If we look at the envelope generators, we've got this thing called repeat on the VCA envelope and on the filter envelope as well. And when I first got this, I just couldn't work out what was happening. I was getting this constant tone, and I'll show you what I was doing. I had this on repeat on the VCA, and with the attack and decay really low. If I turn the oscillators off, there's a buzzing. And no matter what key I pushed, I'm getting this little buzzing, and that's because the envelope generator's acting as an LFO, and when it's that fast, it's a little sort of audio rate oscillator. But interesting, and the VCF envelope has also got that as well. So let's try that. But what all that means is that you've got more modulation ability in this than it first appears. It's a little bit more complex than just a single LFO and 2 envelope generators. So let's move over to the filter now. The filter on this is quite gentle. It's 12 dB, which means it doesn't cut out as many harmonics as a 24 dB one does, but it's got a really nice tone to it. It's resonant. Really nice sort of singy sort of tonality to it. Some really nice rough bits down there. It's not self-resonant. In fact, it's got circuitry in this to stop it self-resonating, so you can't get those really acid squelchy noises out of it, which is a bit of a shame because perhaps if it hadn't got that extra bit of circuitry to stop it resonating at the birth of acid in the 80s, this may have become an instant classic. Instead, most of them were left to rot. But anyway, we've got the different modes on the filter. We've got a bandpass mode. So we're getting some really gritty and dirty things out of there. It is an analog filter and it's just doing some really nice things. We've got a notch filter as well, which just takes out the center frequencies. It's really nice with a bit of LFO on it. Let's try that. I'm a big fan of a notch filter, especially with nice pads. And of course, if you did have some strings that you wanted to put through it, you can bring them in through the external audio. And then we've got high pass as well. Again, some really gritty things coming out of that. So I think this has got some real character, but now we've seen what it can do, is it for you? Well, if you've watched my Behringer Cat episode a few weeks ago, you'll know exactly what I'm going to say here. And I could repeat the same thing word for word, almost replacing cat with wasp, and come to exactly the same conclusion. These Behringer remakes are absolutely amazing value for money if you're in the market for the experience of working with the limitations and sounds of old classic vintage synths. And after playing with the Cat a couple of weeks ago, this really does feel a little bit limited. When looking for some extra tones, you tend to go for a bit of sync or ring modulation or a bit of FM, just for that sort of those little extra harmonics, but you don't have that here. You do have the nice sounding filter, but it's really simple. But that makes it a really good introduction to synthesis, as you'll never find yourself wondering why it's sounding so mental and you can't get a normal sound from it. And of course, if you want something like a Wasp, there's nothing that compares to this. But if you're after a generic synth for around £250, then there's loads of choice, not just from Behringer, but from the likes of Korg's Volkers, IK Multimedia's Uno, Arturia's Microfreak, and there's loads of others to choose from. So it's nice to be spoiled for choice. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and if you did, don't forget you can catch any of these episodes on our Clubbing TV official YouTube channel on the From the Studio playlist. And I've uploaded, as I said, a much more detailed review of this on my Starsky Carr YouTube channel. So if you want more information and reviews, check that out as well. And I'll see you in the next episode of From the Studio.